What happened in that supposedly secret meeting between Deco and Joan Laporta is juicier than any telenovela, and I'm going to drop it with the passion of a Cule who won't even forgive a poorly executed throw-in. Closed doors, steaming coffee, piercing glances that cut to the soul of the club, and a plan that smells like a Blaugrana renaissance, while the Madridistas stand there, mouths open, tongues hanging out, trying to figure out why their manufactured TV whistles aren't cutting it anymore. Pay attention, because this isn't gossip, it's an earthquake. And if you bleed Blaugrana and hate the free whistles handed to Madrid, subscribe now and don't miss a word of this verbal corner kick I'm serving up with the flavor of Jordi Alba sprinting down the wing. They walked in like men on a mission. Deco, with the calm of someone who thinks more about football than headlines, and Laporta, with the theatrical flair of a man who knows one of his phrases is worth more than 10 bought headlines from armchair prophets, speaking softly but with the confidence of men who've seen history and know how to rewrite it in golden letters. And let's cut to the chase, because this wasn't just any conversation. Imagine Deco sketching the reconstruction of Barça on a napkin, like a gaudy masterpiece in the shape of an 11-man starting lineup, while Laporta's eyes gleamed. The idea, not to return to a lost past, but to build a new era, one that makes Madridismo tremble and leaves the usual TV pundit speechless. Tomás Roncero gives the voice, Edu Aguirre the background noise, and together they're the soundtrack of white despair. And we, from the Camp Nou, answer them with goals and sharp sarcasm. In that room, they talked about identity like it was a family heirloom, with respect, with plans, and with the hunger to make the Blaugrana heart beat strong and clear again. They talked about La Masia, yes, but not as a mere showcase argument, but as a backbone. Giving minutes to the kids who feel the shirt, protecting them from vulture journalists and the posturing of agents who sell hopes on credit. Deco put names on the table, not to make noise in the Madrid press, but to plant roots on the pitch, so that La Masia becomes once again the dream factory that makes any Cule with a bit of sense swell with emotion. And listen closely. Both laughed defiantly when the topic of the Madrid press's untouchables came up, those who turn every foul into a tragedy and every white victory into a divine epic. Tomás Roncero, that statue of emotion who always suffers from Madrid, even when they win with divine help, and Edu Aguirre, that insider who sometimes seems to have more exclusives than time itself, with a target of internal jokes that would have put any columnist in the spotlight if the recording had leaked to their networks. Let them scream, invent, and dramatize, said Deco and Laporta. We'll answer them with goals that don't need makeup. And there, the shared laughter rang out like a whip of reality against the bought narrative. Let them talk, let them turn up the volume, let them turn football into melodrama. We'll answer them with football and that Cule irony that disarms anyone. The plan, and believe me, this isn't smoke, was twofold. On one hand, give visibility and protagonism to La Masia, not the showcase kind, but the kind that fights, suffers, and grows at the Camp Nou. On the other, reclaim the media narrative with concrete actions, new stories that humanize the player and ensure that cameras, instead of seeking controversy, seek poetry. Laporta said it clearly with a phrase that resonated like an unwritten anthem: we're not going to beg for respect, we're going to earn it with pride and football. And Deco, with that classic coach's smile, added, let's build players who love the shirt, not the Euros. So that when they step on the pitch, people feel there's Blaugrana blood in their boots. In the meeting, they laughed at the fake exclusives that often emerge from offices in the capital and on sets ready to sell smoke at any hour. Let them say whatever they want, joked Laporta. Let them invent that Laporta wants to change the anthem to a ranchera. Meanwhile, we'll write goals that silence those who live for controversy. And how could you not laugh? From the outside, Madridismo tries to cloak its attacks and whistles, ones that only exist in media makeup rooms, in nobility. And we, Cules to the core, take note and respond with irony, with humor, with that Catalan spark that leaves no puppet intact when needed. The meeting moved toward concrete decisions, measurable squad choices, coherent signings, not for show, but investments in development, and a communication plan that gives Barça back the voice they've tried to steal. Deco insisted that the priority was to recover the joy in the game, the kind outsiders call spectacle, but which for us means identity, high pressing, courage, and that touch of genius that makes you jump out of your seat when the ball grazes the net. Laporta added the organizational part: we won't spend just to spend, we'll invest with common sense. And both agreed on something essential. Barça isn't a title machine for anyone. It's a project with a soul and historical imperatives that must be defended with intelligence, courage, and common sense. And amid the confidences and laughter, hilarious anecdotes emerged. Imagine both of them picturing the white journalists trying to pass off an exclusive about a supposed secret plan to buy whistles, while they, with mischief, proposed buying only tickets to fill the stadium with anthems. The mental image, worthy of a sketch, was that of Madrid's ridicule in the face of a serious, heartfelt strategy. In the middle of the conversation, another guideline emerged. Make La Masia visible, not just in catalog photos, but with real minutes, responsibilities, and a plan so that the kids arrive in the first team with guarantees. We don't want promises, we want minutes. And that was the meeting's promise. Minutes for those who deserve them, protection for those who need it, and demands for those who don't measure up. And if you think everything is idyllic, think about the harshness. They talked about external pressures, smoke signals, offices in the capital trying to influence decisions, that feeling that there are actors who prefer to maintain controversy to feed their own existence. Laporta said it clearly, let them call, let them pressure. In this ship, the Blaugrana colors are in command. Deco agreed and added that the club must be impervious to media currents trying to destabilize for pure TV ratings, because behind every yellow tertulia, there are interests, and they weren't willing to give up an inch of ground to those who make noise their way of life. In this environment, the word unity resonated like a bell. Unity of project, unity of squad, unity of supporters. Laporta talked about strengthening the bond with the socios, making sure the club becomes one of the people and not just about titles, that internal politics serve football and not the other way around. Deco, for his part, insisted that football must become beautiful and effective again, that tactics must align with emotion, and that identity must govern every recruitment decision. And yes, in this imagined meeting, they also talked about names naturally. Not scandals, but sensible options without easy promises. The idea was simple and hard-hitting. Bring in hungry players with competitive DNA, not paychecks that fill headlines but not stadiums, because here, greatness is proven on the pitch, not in the papers. The discussion also had its moment of sharp humor. Imagining Edu Aguirre leaking something no one asked for and Tomas Roncero dramatizing as if the world were about to end. Both became the target of jokes that fired up those present, because when the rain of nonsense comes from outside, we respond with irony and the perspective of someone who doesn't get swept up in others' theatrics. And so, between laughter and plans, a path for the season took shape. Trusting in La Masia, betting on local talent, and building a narrative that gives us back the sporting and media protagonism, not out of revenge, but for footballing justice within the project, because it's not short-term, I repeat with the same intensity as if I were singing in the stands. And revisiting the meeting, they talked about rhythm, phases of construction. First stabilize, then grow, and finally dominate. Deco talked about tactical patience, and Laporta about organized ambition, a mix that promises to be lethal if executed with consistency. They also talked about image, about Barça reclaiming control of its narrative, not allowing others to write the story in our place. They proposed channels, personal stories of players that humanize the club, and content plans that feed on passion, not conflict. Because the best way to silence those who thrive on noise is to give them what they least expect: real football and supporters who know how to laugh at conspiracies. And in the middle of designing this Barça with character and poetry, they allowed themselves, of course, a few sharp jokes at the Cules pride's expense about those who always cry in white with scripted tears. Let them keep producing tears, said Deco. We'll produce goals and nights of singing. In that room, this humor was therapy and fuel. Mocking the noise to focus on what really matters. Playing well, winning with dignity, and rewriting the narrative of Spanish football from the Blaugrana heart. But the meeting wasn't a fairy tale without looking at the enemy. They spoke openly about how Madridismo uses the media machinery like a kitchen knife to cut the credibility of others. They have a whole industry of outrage, Laporta affirmed with irony. And some are its best actors. And there, without shame, they launched devastating jokes about the characters. Tomas Roncero turned into a dramatist of tears, Edu Aguirre into that figure who always arrives with smoke in his mouth and leaves with an exclusive that didn't exist the day before. There was no hatred, just a clinical description. Identifying the beasts to learn how to dodge them. And the decision was clear. Not to play into the game of biased headlines, but to respond with facts and our own media strategy that doesn't depend on compliant channels. They designed actions to counter the white narrative, press conferences with selected questions, controlled interviews where young players can speak without traps, and audiovisual spaces where the Blaugrana truth can speak without interested intermediaries. Additionally, As an elegant revenge, they talked about reclaiming Barca's historical narrative. Documentaries, pieces that tell the story of La Masia, the supporters, and content that doesn't seek fights but pride. Because nothing angers the agitator more than seeing his leading role disappear. If they don't sell controversies, they fade away. And that, my friends, is good news. When they turn off the noise, all that's left is the truth and the work. Between the last jokes, Laporta said, they invent storms. We invent goals, and the phrase stuck like a mantra. The laughter in the room wasn't gratuitous scorn, but a warning. Let the media show go on. We have plans to make their audience tire of their lamentations and come sing our victories. There was also a block dedicated to internal organization, how to coordinate the sporting areas with the institutional ones to avoid ridiculous leaks and sterile decisions. Deco demanded clear processes, recruitment that works with technical and character criteria, a first team that leads by example, and a Masia that isn't just a pretty label for photos. Laporta demanded transparency toward the socios, controls to avoid absurd negotiations, and an executive team that understands the essence of the club. These were intense minutes where they discussed contracts, recruitment concepts, and the need to avoid entering the market with a racing heart. We won't recruit like someone going to a fair to buy a balloon, Laporta said with his characteristic irony. We'll recruit with our heads, with culture, and with the desire to restore an identity. They also addressed the issue of agents and their games. Avoiding intermediaries who sow rumors and shady deals. Choosing representatives who take care of players and don't use them as tools for media scandals. In parallel, they agreed on a firm negotiation policy with entities and players. They seek commitment, not just paychecks. And that's when the idea of centralizing some sporting decisions emerged to prevent news from leaking before agreements, to ensure that white journalists don't set the agenda. It's a narrative control strategy. If fewer dirty leaks filter out, there's less fuel for the fires of misinformation. The emotional aspect inevitably had its place. Time was dedicated to the supporters, designing initiatives to restore the bond between the club and the neighborhood, ensuring the socios members feel like owners of the narrative again. Laporta proposed themed gatherings, roundtable discussions with former players and representative figures, and events that avoid posturing and strengthen the authentic Blaugrana spirit. Deco, always sensitive, added that the connection with the stands isn't repaired just with results, but with stories, life testimonies, listening to the grandfather who has held his season ticket for 50 years and the child who hasn't yet attended their first match. They discussed social programs, school visits, neighborhood activities, and opening the doors of La Masia so children can see the real training process. It was a plan to restore the club's soul, not just sell tickets, but to rebuild a sense of belonging. In this section, the figure of LAMINE inevitably came up, not as a media toy, but as an example of the kind of player Barca wants to develop. Committed, talented, and with enough personality to withstand the media storm. Let's take care of him, don't expose him, they said. With that phrase, it became clear that the plan includes specific protections for young talents. Measured interviews, mentors within the club, and a program to help them understand what it means to be in the spotlight without losing their essence. All of this came with a dose of sharp humor toward those who turn young players into media cannon fodder. If Roncero were a teacher, he'd give lessons in crying, someone quipped, and the room burst into laughter. The message was clear. Give supporters back their central role and protect those who will represent them in the future. The economic plan also had its moment. They didn't talk about spending for the sake of spending, but about investing wisely. Deco and Laporta agreed that sporting sustainability comes from smart investments. Training structures, Masia improvements, optimal youth training conditions, and management that prioritizes stability. Laporta was direct. We're not interested in being the flashy summer splash that leaves a financial hangover. They discussed business models that prioritize the club's social impact, not just short-term profitability. Partnerships with companies that respect the club's image, sponsorships that add value rather than drown the jersey in commercialism. In this part of the discussion, warnings were issued to those who see Barca as just a brand. We are a history, a soul, and a responsibility, Deco said. And with responsibility comes boldness. Investing in youth, sports technology, health and recovery, and global scouting that finds talent beyond the spotlight. The goal: build a structure that can compete with both heart and mind, without mortgaging future generations. Here they criticized, with the cool elegance that defines them, the politics of spending without a plan, which sometimes sells fleeting happiness and creates lasting wounds. Let those on the outside keep believing everything can be bought with money. We prefer to buy hard work and heart, Laporta summarized. It was a direct jab at Madridismo, which confuses investment with waste and spectacle with vision. The section dedicated to La Masia was long, because they know that's where the Blaugrana soul finds its salvation. They decided to create more personalized training pathways, coaches who teach not just football but values, psychological tutors, social media training so young players don't fall into media traps, and a clear route to the first team. They talked about giving minutes to those who deserve them, but with support. The idea isn't to throw young players into the media fire. They also agreed to strengthen friendly matches against demanding rivals to accelerate growth without the pressure of official competition, creating a schedule of real tests where coaches can evaluate without the bias of immediacy. Laporta emphasized the need for patience with La Masia. We don't want 24-hour prodigies, we want players for generations, he said solemnly. Deco, with the tenderness he shows when talking about youth, added concrete steps. Shared living arrangements, leadership workshops, learning the style of play, and rotations that ensure experience without burning out talent. In this section, they laughed again at commentators who demand instant titles and minutes. Let Roncero be a presenter, someone joked. Here we have time and the ball. The entire block was a love letter to La Masia and patience, a return to believing that the academy produces magic if nurtured, protected, and respected. And as expected, LAMINE's figure reappeared inevitably, not as a media toy, but as an example of the kind of player Barça wants to develop. Committed, talented, and with the personality to withstand the media storm. Let's take care of him, don't expose him, they said. With that phrase, it became clear that the plan includes specific protections for young talents. Measured interviews, club mentors, and education on what it means to be in the spotlight without losing their essence. All of this came with a dose of sharp humor toward those who turn young players into media cannon fodder. If Roncero were a teacher, he'd give lessons in crying, someone quipped, and the room burst into laughter. The message was clear. Give supporters back their central role and protect those who will represent them in the future. Finally, they closed with a golden point. How to measure success without falling into the trap of titles. They decided on clear indicators: La Masia minutes in important matches, youth progression in performance, reduction of media leaks, member satisfaction, and, of course, consistent sporting results. Laporta proposed a quarterly evaluation system to adjust trajectories without drama. Deco asked for patience and consistency so the indicators have real meaning. Additionally, they agreed on transparent communication of results with supporters. No smoke, no misleading headlines, just real statistics, videos of daily work, and explanations of decisions. They closed the meeting with a scene almost cinematic, as if every word, every glance, every gesture had been carefully choreographed to mark a turning point in the club's history. Deco and Laporta locked eyes for a long moment, a heavy silence settling between them, as if they were sealing much more than a simple agreement, a solemn promise, a sacred pact to restore Barça to its lost greatness. Their smiles, both complicit and determined, spoke volumes. They knew this moment was more than just a strategic discussion. It was the beginning of a renaissance, the awakening of a sleeping giant, ready to rise with an elegance and strength that would shake the foundations of Spanish football. Laporta, with his characteristic confidence, placed a hand on Deco's shoulder, as if to remind him that the weight of the club's history now rested on their shoulders. "We will do it, not just for us, but for them," he murmured, symbolically pointing to the empty stands of the Camp Nou, as if he could already hear the chants of the supporters echoing through the stadium. Deco, always calm but with a newfound determination, nodded. "With style, with care, and above all, with that irony that defines us. We will show them what it truly means to wear these colors." And as they prepared to leave the room, a collaborator, who had remained in the shadows until then, approached them. "Let Roncero continue with his theatrics," he whispered with a mischievous smile. "We will write the soundtrack for him. A soundtrack made of goals, victories, and that pride which silences the critics." The laughter that followed echoed through the halls of the Camp Nou, as if the walls themselves were applauding this renewed determination. This promise, whispered in the intimacy of that room, has already spread like wildfire through the imaginary stands of the stadium. The supporters, even if physically absent, already seem to feel this renewal, this new energy that will restore Barça to its rightful place as a master, not only on the field but also in the narrative of Spanish football. More than just a plan, it is a silent revolution in the making, a targeted response to those who have long dictated the rules of the media game. The conclusion emerging from this meeting is of rare power, a raw force that doesn't settle for words but embodies itself in concrete actions and a clear vision. This plan, if executed with the rigor and authenticity demanded by Barcelonismo, has the potential to bring joy back to the supporters, silence the detractors, and restore Barça to where it has always belonged, at the top. The Madridistas and their media allies, accustomed to shaping narratives to their advantage, might well find themselves speechless, silenced by the strength of a club that has finally decided to take control of its destiny. And now, as this spark begins to ignite in the hearts of the Cules, it is time to spark the debate, to bring out reactions and ideas with the passion that characterizes true supporters. Do you think Lamine Yamal, with his precocious talent and audacity, will be the one to silence the Madridista and pundit mouths once and for all when he proudly wears the first-team jersey? His emergence could well become the symbol of this renaissance, a punch in the narrative dominated by Real Madrid. The plan focused on La Masia and identity, driven by Deco and Laporta. Is it the magic recipe to restore Barca's greatness, or a romantic dream that will need to be adjusted with smart and targeted signings? The question is crucial. Can we rely solely on young talents, no matter how promising, or do we need to surround them with experienced players to ensure a smooth transition to the top? For how long will we let Madridismo media dictate the narrative, impose their alternative truths, and manipulate opinion with invented tiers and controversies? The time may have come to take back control of the narrative, to tell our story with our words, our images, our victories. More than just a reaction, it is a cultural offensive that must be waged, a reconquest of our media space. What concrete measures would you propose to reclaim our voice, so that Barça is no longer just a side note in TV debates, but the main actor in a new footballing era? Should we invest in our own media, strengthen the players' presence on social networks, or organize events that place the club at the heart of conversations, not for controversy, but for the football it embodies? And finally, on a more emotional, deeper and visceral note, if you bleed Blaugrana, if every defeat tears you apart and every victory lifts you up, then this message is for you. Subscribe, join this legion of passionate fans who refuse to see their club silenced. Shout with us for every goal as if it were the last, vibrate with every dribble, every decisive pass, every spectacular save. Because loving Barça is not a fleeting affection, it is an oath, a promise made to oneself to remain faithful, no matter what. We are here to honor it to the core, to live every moment with the intensity that makes us much more than simple supporters, a family, a community, an invincible legion. Visca el Barça.